It's a two-story mother-daughter house, which means it has two kitchens, one downstairs and one upstairs. My sister isn't home very much because she frequently stays with her boyfriend, who lives 20 miles away, and I'm 30. I shouldn't let being home alone ever freak me out. But admittedly, sometimes it does. This happened on a night that I was home alone in my living room watching a scary movie. My part of the house is an open layout, so the living room, dining room, and kitchen are all one big space. My couch is in the middle of the space, so as I watch TV on the couch, my back is to a large part of the room behind me. So for those a little more easily spooked, it wouldn't be the most comfortable place to be sitting alone watching a scary movie. I'll admit that as I watched the movie in the dark room with nothing but the light from the TV to cancel the darkness of the room, I found myself glancing over my shoulder a lot. I like to think I'm not the only 30-year-old male who does that. Anyway, after the movie, I brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights in the house, and went to sleep. I woke up around 1 a.m. and wasn't sure why I woke up at first. Then I heard a voice downstairs, and it sounded like my sister was inside the house. So it's not like she was pleading with me to open the door, but I knew it was my sister's voice. I had no idea what she was saying at me because I was still drowsy and unable to think clearly. All I could assume was that she must have been calling for me or arguing with her lover, so I got out of bed and into the pitch black hall. I turned on the hallway lights and proceeded through the living room when I heard my sister's voice from below again, this time saying my name. I walked down her little hallway towards her kitchen, find a light switch and flick it on the light in the kitchen, lights up her little apartment, including her living room. The light starts off dim and needs time to brighten up. I'm not lying when I say I was groggy as hell. I walked down her little hallway towards her kitchen, find a light switch and flick it on the light in the kitchen, lights up her little apartment, including her living room. The light starts off dim and needs time to brighten up. But there was no one down there, not her or her lover. I proceeded to her bedroom, but it was vacant. I cried her name once and no one answered, but shortly after, I heard something drop to the floor in my sister's bedroom, which I had just checked and it was empty. I went back up the stairs like a little kid and went back to my bed to where my phone was. I tried to call her a few times, but she didn't pick up. I eventually fell asleep, and in the morning I woke up to text from my sister asking why I called her at 1. I asked her if she was home last night, and she said no. She was currently staying at her boyfriend's house. I went downstairs to her room to see what might have fallen on the floor, but there wasn't a single object on the floor that could have made that noise. I'm led to believe I hallucinated everything I heard that night, which is what I want to believe because the alternative would be much more horrific. But I've never really hallucinated anything else or had any kind of sleep disorder. So how vividly I heard my sister's voice and that sound in her room really freaks me out. This happened when I was a youngster and I was home alone. It was the summer and I was home during summer break because both my parents were at work. I was approximately 12 years old at the time. I have an older brother who went to one of his friends' houses that day. When I was home alone, I would just hang out and do whatever I wanted. Usually I would go on the computer that we had and play Minecraft or something similar. It was probably in the early afternoon, and after I'd been on the computer in the living room for a while, I went into the kitchen to get something to eat. The kitchen was on the back side of the house and we lived in a split level. I'll also mention that the neighborhood was pretty average and a little bit on the quieter side. It was while I was standing in the kitchen that I noticed something out the window. I just barely saw movement at first, but it looked like somebody was walking by. I moved over to another window to see. That's when I noticed a man walking to the back side of the house. I calmed down almost immediately after seeing a guy walking into our backyard. He went to the very back side of our house, and near one of the basement windows, I went back to find some food in the kitchen. I'd been a little worried seeing a guy walking into our backyard. He went to the very back side of our house and near one of the basement windows. After about 5 minutes in the kitchen, I looked over and observed that the guy was still there. Normally, they would come and go in a flash, staying for no more than a minute. I went back into the living room to get back on the computer, but a short while later, I had the sensation that I should get up and double check that the man was no longer there. Perhaps it was because I was home alone with a child and I felt a little worried. I carefully walked back over to the window and saw that the man was still there. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't tell what he was doing because I could only see part of him from the angle that I was at, which was higher up than he was. He seemed to be doing something and was near the basement window, but I couldn't tell what. I went to walk over to another window upstairs, which would have a better angle, but I had to be careful so the guy wouldn't see me. Fortunately, I really messed up as I was walking over. I accidentally hit a can that was near the edge of a counter in the kitchen. I knocked it over and it fell onto the edge ground. This created a loud noise, and the next thing I knew, I saw the man hurriedly walking away back to the side of the house. I moved to the front of the house and I observed the man casually going down the street until I couldn't see him anymore. I wondered if he was even a meter reader and why he would leave so abruptly. For the most part, I was just glad he was gone. I went back to the computer and stayed there for the most part until my brother and parents returned home. When they did, I didn't even think to tell them about the guy who had been there because I assumed he was gone for good. My brothers and my bedrooms were in the basement while my parents' bedrooms were upstairs. Because it was summer, we could stay up as late as we wanted. I recall that on this night, my parents went to bed and my brother walked down to his bedroom. I stayed up and was on the computer. All of the lights in the house were off except for a small lamp in the living room near me. I stayed up on the computer until I got really tired, which was probably around 1. Then I turned off the lamp and went downstairs to go to bed. When I got downstairs I had to walk past a small basement living room in order to get to my bedroom. As I was walking past, I happened to see something in the window. The man was back. I could only see a figure of a man, but I knew who it was because it was the same window he had been at earlier in the day. I then heard noises coming from the window as if it was about to open, and I was suddenly very afraid because it was really dark down there. And I hit the light switch, which I happened to be really close to when this happened, and it lit up the whole room and I couldn't see the man very well. I went running as well, but I went back upstairs into my parents' bedroom and yelled for them to wake up. About a minute later, my dad came out asking what was going on. By the time I explained everything, the man had long gone. My dad went out and inspected the house all around, though. He was able to find that the back window the man kept messing with had quite a bit of damage. It was almost like the man had been trying to remove the window and get inside the house, and he was very close to succeeding after that night, though. The man never returned. I remember being very scared for a while that he would, and I slept upstairs on the couch because I felt safer there. Luckily, never did.
This happened nearly 10 years ago, but it's still one of my favorite horror stories about campfires. My mother began leaving me home alone when I was 12 years old, which may seem young, but I was mature for my age and she worked a lot, so those are my excuses. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a large complex just off a major highway. I was alone one night, as usual, when my mother worked a late shift. I was watching TV and quietly working on some homework when I heard a loud crashing noise. I couldn't tell where it came from, but I thought it was a gunshot. I'd never heard a gunshot up close before, so I wasn't sure. The vibrations shook my young body to its core, like I'd been hit by a car. I immediately jumped onto the floor and hid under the coffee table. I could hear commotion outside the apartment in the hall, but I couldn't tell what was going on. The gunshots kept ringing in my ears, and I was really scared. I tried to remain calm, but my mind was racing with thoughts of what might be happening outside. I wanted to call the police, but my phone was in the other room charging, and I was too scared to move. Suddenly, the sound of sirens began. I mustered the courage to look out the window at first. It started with only one police car, and soon there were at least 12 cop cars and 2 fire engines outside my building. I could hear conversations outside, but couldn't understand what they were saying. I started to feel sick to my stomach and wished my parents were there with me. After what seemed like hours but was really only a few minutes, the ruckus outside began to calm down. I could hear police officers talking to each other and the sound of radios crackling. I wondered what was going on and whether anyone had been hurt when there was a knock at my door. My mother had always taught me not to open the door when I was alone, but if it was the police, perhaps that would be an exception. Then I heard a voice call out, saying it was the police, and asked me to open the door. I slowly walked over and unlocked it. There were 2 police officers standing outside, and they looked very serious. One of them asked me if I was okay, and I nodded my head. At this point, I was in tears. He asked if my parents were home, and I replied that they weren't. Nevertheless, I gave him my mother's phone number, and he called her and waited with me until she arrived home. It came out that my neighbor, who I had only met sometimes, was a wanted felon. He had been there for a few months and had already killed at least 1 person. When his gun accidentally went off, the police were called. I was shocked and couldn't believe that someone like that had been living so close to me. The police officers told me I was brave for maintaining my composure while everything outside was happening. The police then sealed off the apartment for a few days. I stayed in that building till I was 18, and every time I passed that door, I would see the scars and remember that night, since they had used some kind of tape to block off the entrance whenever the scene was left for a night or so.